our entire BCA Board of Directors, thank you for being here tonight. For those of you who may be less familiar with BCA, the Business Council for the Arts is a nonprofit organization representing more than 150 businesses and organizations throughout North Texas. We are in service to the business community, advancing the arts across our region and serving as a premier connector between business and the arts. Through innovative employee-focused programs, BCA supports its corporate members while cultivating arts advocates, supporting local artists, and driving meaningful cultural and economic impact across North Texas. One area we've long focused on is the intersection of arts and health. We've made this a priority because it is so important to our corporate members. Supporting workplaces where people feel better, feel more connected, and feel valued in what they do. When employees are healthier, happier, and more engaged, that naturally strengthens leadership, culture, and the ability of organizations to do their best work. And that focus brings us to tonight's program. I'd like to recognize those who helped bring this evening together. Thank you to our BCA Arts and Health Committee for your leadership and insight. And a very special thank you to Dr. John Harper and Dr. Dirk Frater, our event co-chairs, whose vision and care shape this program each year and make it truly one of the most anticipated on our calendar. Thank you for joining us this evening. And now it's my pleasure to invite our CEO, Stacey Adams, to add a few additional words.
So much, Joel. I just wanted to take a moment and say that I just want to mirror the things that Joel mentioned, that if you are not familiar with the Business Council for the Arts, I hope that you'll take the time to visit our website, ntbca.org. We do incredible programs around the arts. One of our most popular programs is Arts and Health. It's actually led by Dr. Shantae Mayfield, who's back here on the left. Sorry, wave for everybody. So if you would like to get more involved in conversations around topics like these, come to me. I'd love to tell you more about the BCA. But I also want to thank two very wonderful and special organizations that make this evening possible. The first is the Loopy Murchison Foundation, who is the presenting sponsor tonight, and then also the Texas Health Resources Foundation. We owe them the terrific thanks for that reception and the beautiful food. Thank you so much for your support. Can we give them a round of applause? And now I have such a distinct pleasure. For those of you that know Dr. John Harper, you know he is a living legend. He is not only a distinguished cardiologist, but he is the foremost leader, really, that's leading the charge on these conversations around the need for literature, the arts, for considering the whole human as we face the future. He's been doing this type of leadership for years. He actually started this lecture series more than 16 years ago, and it's come to now live in partnership with the BCA about 4 years ago, and we are so thankful. And now he's added Dr. Harper as a co-chair, who's been a wonderful support. So I hope that you'll make a note of this incredible program and come every single year. But in addition to all the amazing work Dr. Harper does, he just happened to start another 501c3 nonprofit last week, because that's what you do when you have all this time. I don't know how you do it. But started an incredible program called the Cypress Fellowship, which is a writing fellowship, a faith-based writing fellowship. Really exciting. I know he'd love to tell you about it. But without further ado, I'll pass the torch over to Dr. Harper.
Welcome. Thank you for coming back after closing down in April on short notice. Can you hear me? I want to thank Stacey. I want to thank Nancy Nasher, Business Council, all these people that have helped us do this. I'd also like to mention someone very special to this evening, and that's Dr. Larry Hergot from Denver, Colorado. Larry was the academic, moral, and spiritual leader of our efforts to start literature medicine more than 16 years ago. He can't be here tonight, but sends his warmest regards. The history of this meeting is that for more than 16 years we've been meeting. The name has been Intersections, the intersections of evidence-based medicine and compassion at the patient's bedside. By compassion, we mean when somebody recognizes sympathetically another person's distress and then sets about to fix the problem. That is compassion. We're not looking for simply empathy, but we're looking for action. For these 16 years, we've had speakers come in, authors like Tracy Kidder, John Barry, Raphael Campo, Jack Coulihan, Salvatore Mangione, people from all around the country who have written important pieces of literature that go to the question about how do we put humanities into medicine and take it to the bedside. We believe that literature, art, music, philosophy, lighting, and even architecture play a huge role in bringing compassion to the bedside. We can be taught, we can learn, and without it, we are somewhat hollow. If we do this, it can lead to empathy, better communication, easing of anxiety, understanding of our patients. The subject tonight was pretty straightforward. Is there a role for liberal arts education in the training of a medical or other professional in the world today? Now, I could poll the audience right now, and I think I'd probably get almost a unanimous vote that yes, indeed it is. So we can go home. We're done. But are we? Are we really? I think not. Medicine is changing, and let me give you a somewhat personal, no p-value attached, no statistical significance, but a view of some of the changes that are happening in medicine that are pertinent to why we have this audience here tonight. I meet with residents on a regular basis in a conference called Coffee with Cardiology, and through the years I've done little quizzes of general knowledge. And through the years, I unfortunately have seen a reduction in general knowledge. And let me say right now, I do not blame the residents. I think they are only doing what they've been taught. They're brilliant, young, motivated people. But out of a room full of people, I could get one person that could name an impressionist artist. No one who knew who Anton Chekhov was, or the music of Borodin, two physicians who have gone in along with art. As you came in, we had JAMA covers that were circulating. For many years, the Journal of the American Medical Association had art on the cover and then an explanation inside. And you could become an art history major simply by reading those. It no longer is there. There is less focus on the liberal arts. Of the residents, very few of them have taken any liberal arts courses at all. Occasionally English as a requirement for writing, but other than that, no. Most medical schools do require 8 hours of intensive writing for admission. Sometimes that can be met through AP exams. There was a lack of awareness of the Western canon of art, music, literature, which many of us felt were foundational to our very existence, but certainly to medicine and how it is practiced. This really didn't imply that they understood the heritage of our very own profession. Many didn't know who William Osler was, the father of internal medicine. Is it real? I think it is. Now, mine is a small sample, but I've talked to other doctors who teach around the country, and this is often the case. Why is that? And how does it bear on our topic tonight? Well, in many cultures, the decision is made very early to be a physician. In India, we have a number of young residents who are from India. When they take their high school exam, if they do very well in math, they become engineers. If they do very well in science, they become doctors. No choice, that's what it will be. Here in the United States, the process of becoming a doctor starts earlier than it once did. It starts in high school, because in high school, the stress and the effort to get into your elite school, that one that paved the way into medical school for you, starts. Activities, volunteer work. Once you get into your college, it just starts over. You need excellent grades to get into medical school. There's really very little room for failure. That's worthy of thinking about. If you have a family that you ill yourself and you don't do well, your grade point may fall below what will qualify you for medical school. In the brochures for medical schools, they often say they will take into account progression or improvement as you go through the years. But let me highlight at UT Southwestern, the grade point average for several years was between 3.85 and 3.97 to get in. The MCAT examination, which is the medical college admission test, has a perfect score of 528. The median score at UT Southwestern was 518, with more than 10% of the students making over 524. So if you want to go to medical school, you better pay attention. In addition to the academics, you have to do volunteer work. You have to shadow for more than 75 hours. And all of this is before you ever apply and get into medical school. The volunteer work is expected. Most of the people that go to medical school are science majors, but not all. At UT Southwestern, there's a significant number of people have taken humanities degrees. The other thing at medical school is the focus changes. When you go to medical school, most students learn between 35,000 and 55,000 new words. That is, they learn a new language. And they do this while they're studying very difficult classes. And as they're doing this, they also have to do research, volunteer work, charity work. The residency application is equally difficult to going into college. The grades must be high. The only writing that is done is a personal statement. Once you're a resident, then it starts all over again for a fellowship. And the pyramid becomes steeper and taller. The other thing that happens to these young students is they accumulate debt. More than 75% of students who go to medical school come out of school with debt. The average debt is between $246,000 and $264,000, often accumulated through college into medical school. 30% of medical students have more than $300,000 debt, often at interest rates of 8.94%. They focus on this. They're worried about it. Oftentimes, these focusing on being so busy, excelling, not failing, leads young residents to aggregate some of the standard descriptions of what a doctor is supposed to be. Tinsley Harrison talks about a doctor and what a privilege it is and what we should ask in our profession. The dictum that a doctor should believe that the patient's interest is the first interest often goes by the wayside. Now you're saying, no, that isn't true, Dr. Harper. These children who grow up to be doctors don't act that way. I've had people directly tell me, Dr. Harper, how do you expect me to think about humanities in my patients when I've got a huge debt? Then they get into practice. The hope of the end in sight. And then they're working 60 hours a week. They're trying to pay their debt back. Many of them work for organizations that give them a schedule where they have very little time with patients, so that the humane aspect of what they do may not be manifest. There also is a glut of information. It is estimated that a primary care doctor would have to read 5,000 articles a day to stay current. That medical knowledge half time, that is the time it takes for half of the medical knowledge to become obsolete. In 1950 was 50 years. In 2020, 77 days. There were 800,000 new articles cited in PubMed last year. This is tough. EMR, the godsend that we were all going to have EMR, takes about 30% of a doctor's time. We'll talk about whether AI is going to help with that. But that's 30% of time they can't be being human. What does this do? It leads to burnout. 25% of all physicians would not recommend to their children to go into medicine. For some of us, that's a painful statement. 30 to 35% of doctors claim to be burned out, depressed, and we have one of the highest suicide rates of any profession. There's a new concept of young doctors called FIRE, financial independence, retire early. They're worried about this. The average age of a doctor retirement, an article I saw this week, has gone from 50 to 48 years. That means you're giving up the years of wisdom and experience that all of us coveted. And many of us went into medicine thinking we would practice till we could no longer. Who do we blame? Certainly not the students. These are bright, intelligent, motivated, humanly oriented people. It may be the system. And now we have a new threat. Artificial intelligence. Since we planned this meeting, there have been reams of new articles about artificial intelligence, and we're going to ask the panel a little bit about it in a minute. But how does this impact? It impacts you as patients and you as doctors. It's hardly a single time that I go to dinner that I don't hear complaints about doctors not being available. The visits are too short. They're turning and typing on their computer instead of looking at me. I never see the same doctor. I don't have continuity. Paul Kalanithi, when ill himself, a wonderful physician at Stanford, reached out in 3 different ways in his book and said, I need you. And 3 different times someone said, I'll never leave you. And that's what many of our patients are not seeing. Wow. I don't think we can vote unanimously that there is not a need for liberal arts. And I think we need to ask ourselves, how can we bring them back, make them more important, make them more functional to keep medicine the way we and you want it. Fortunately, we have a panel tonight that's going to solve all these problems. I'd like to introduce our panel. It's a really distinguished group. I'll start at the far end. President J. Hartzell is the president of Southern Methodist University. He's been here just over a year. He came from the University of Texas, where he was president. Some of us who went to SMU are absolutely thrilled. He also was the dean of the Macomb Business School, a worldwide known institution. He's an expert in finance, real estate, economics, and has started a push for SMU to meet some of the demands that we're talking about tonight. So we welcome him. Sunita Koshy-Nesbitt, sitting next to him, is a cardiologist, electrophysiologist, a person that deals with electrical activity of the heart, heart rhythm disturbances, and their treatment. But in addition, she has an MBA, and is now Chief Medical Officer and Chief of Quality for the Physicians Group at Texas Health Resources. And oh, by the way, she was a concert violinist, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Mayo, the distinguished Altshuler Distinguished Professor of Law at SMU. And you're asking, why would a doctor bring a lawyer here? It's because, it's because I have the ultimate respect for him. He has taught for many years, went to Amherst, one of the classic liberal arts universities in this country, Syracuse University. Has been at SMU for many years and taught 19 different courses at SMU. That's the breadth of his knowledge in law. But in addition, he's an adjunct professor at UT Southwestern Medical School and has had a course for law students and medical students in poetry, literature, and the arts. So I think he's perfectly suited to talk with us tonight. Lastly, Dr. Dirk Frater, a good friend of mine and co-moderator tonight, is an internal medicine physician, an English major at Yale, went to Albert Einstein Medical School, came to UT Southwestern, and then was an emergency room physician here at Presbyterian for 13 years, and now has a concierge internal medicine program office, the Barrow group. In addition to that, he's a poet, widely published, who loves writing, literature, and poetry. So help me welcome our panelists. I'm going to start by asking each of the people tonight are going to give you a little bit of background about why they're interested in this topic, how it's impacted their lives. And I'm going to ask Professor Mayo to talk with us about the topics we've raised tonight, about the liberal arts, how they impact law and medicine. Tom?
Thanks, John. John mentioned a course I taught for about 25 or 30 years at the law school at SMU, Law, Literature, and Medicine. Fourth year med students in their last semester, third year law students in their last semester. We read novels, poems, plays, and short stories. That was it. There was no final exam and no paper. At the end of the semester, everybody did some kind of art project. They drew, painted, sculpted, wrote poems, wrote short stories, wrote novellas, everything you can imagine. Most of them signed up for the course telling me that they don't have a creative bone in their body. And one of my jobs was to prove them wrong. And they proved themselves wrong. They rose to the occasion, and it was pretty awesome. I hear back occasionally from students who've gone through that course, now in practice, and a few of them have said that was the most important course I took in medical school or law school, which I actually blew me away because I was just doing this for the fun of it. I didn't think it had any real practical application when I started doing this, but over time I started to realize that there's a long tradition of literature and law, and a long tradition, growing tradition anyway, of literature and medicine. And if you want to be expansive about it, it goes back to the 19th century at least, in a sort of modern form. John's alluded to some of the great physicians who became, if anything, even greater writers. So this was a labor of love. It came out of my undergraduate background. It was a very, if I can put in a plug for my school, a very Amherst-y kind of course, and one that over time it sort of took its own form, its own pace, and was something that a lot of students who signed up for it out of curiosity ended up really finding their professional identity through literature, through the arts, through music. We had a little bit of everything. And I'll just say right now that one of my subversive goals for teaching the course that I never expressed explicitly was to model empathy. Empathy gets kind of a bad rap these days for reasons that I don't quite understand. I think maybe some of us oversell empathy, and it makes people think, do I want an empathetic cardiologist or do I want the world's best cardiologist? And my answer is you don't have to choose between the two. One really great physician and ethicist, Ed Pellegrino, wrote that the first kindness is competence. And I totally believe that. But it's not the only kindness. And I wanted to focus on other forms that kindness takes in practice, because both of these professions are about people. They're about others and about meeting others with their expectations, their needs, their hopes, so that you can be effective working with them as either their physician or their attorney. And I'll stop there and we'll come back to some of these ideas a little bit later.
Thank you. President Hartzell, I'd like to talk about liberal arts. The classic liberal arts in the Middle Ages had the trivium of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and the quadrivium of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. That's certainly changed. In your mind, SMU, a liberal arts university, is there to teach them. What does that mean to you? And the second question that goes with that is there must be some tension when a parent drops their student off at SMU, expecting them to come away with a liberal arts education, to be humane and understand the world, but then 4 years later get into the best graduate school. How do you deal with that, Dr. Hartzell?
Yeah, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here and honor to be part of this panel. So a couple of things come to mind. So, so I went, like a couple of others in the audience I know, went to a small liberal arts school, Trinity University in San Antonio, and picked it in part because I wanted a chance to study liberal arts. And when I made the move to SMU, part of what excited me about it was really an ability to connect back with that part of what is special about, I think, a college experience. When it goes well, you have a great professor at the front of the room, Tom, or somebody like Tom, in a classroom where students are engaged, and it really is a special opportunity. And then I think about the ability to learn how the very basics of reading, writing, communicating, talking to humans, appreciating their point of view. And then I think there are moments where there's a bit of food for the soul. And there are opportunities in college to really develop and nurture that. I had a call yesterday with one of our most famous young but incredible entrepreneurs, Whitney Wolfe Herd, who is the CEO of Bumble. And part of the conversation, she said, you know what stands out most to me about my time at SMU academically was the sociology class I took, the class I took in international relations. Told a story about she still remembers hearing about how Ronald McDonald doesn't smile in certain cultures because that wouldn't go over well, and how that frames her thinking when, as a CEO or business leader, she goes into a different environment, a different setting culturally. So I think it is very much a part of what we need to be talking about and thinking about. And in some bit of irony, I think, to your question about parents, I think the pendulum is swinging a bit back toward the arts and the humanities. I thought when you said when parents drop our kids off, you were going to say they tell them to get into the Cox School of Business. And if anything, I think that's been the long-run trend in higher education has been toward the STEM fields, toward the professional schools, and really away from the humanities. And we can talk more about it, but I really think this is a moment where people are starting to think, well, given the way technology is unfolding and things are developing, I would argue it's going to be a renaissance moment for the liberal arts. And I think in my year at SMU, I've seen way more openness to thinking about how to pursue that, how to combine things from the arts and the humanities with other parts of campus, pull things together for students. And I see things like a number of students who are double and triple majoring, and it really is encouraging. So I hope, in spite of your intro, I hope you give some sense of optimism.
Thank you. I told them before we started tonight that I was going to challenge them, because these are not simple solutions. You have to have a 3.97, you better not fail. You better not fail the course. An English major, a pre-med at SMU takes English, 8 hours of English, sociology, statistics, and psychology. How can we find ways for them to get into English, history, philosophy, and still maintain their ability to get into those schools, and still have time to do the college things, to have fun, to grow, to learn how to fail and recover from it? I know those are nearly impossible questions, but how do you approach it?
And this back to me. So, I would say, and you heard my bio, I think about things as economic problems. Supply responds to demand. And so students are very responsive to what they understand to be valued in the fields and disciplines and areas where they want to go. So I think it is important, if being a physician is somebody's dream, to see examples of that, to hear the stories, to understand how those other skills really round out a person's profile. They have to think it's going to be at least neutral or somewhat valued by schools where they're applying. And by the way, I should back up and say I'm sort of I guess I eat my own cooking in some sense. My daughter is starting her first day today as a resident at the University of Washington, Seattle Medical School in orthopedics, and she was an anthropology major at Bryn Mawr. And so for her, I lived it through the parents' eyes. It meant she had to figure out other times to take things like organic chemistry. Her summers were differently full than otherwise. But she thought it was a different hook. And she found people that asked her more in interviews and conversations about her anthropology studies than they did about the hard sciences in many ways. So So I think we have to help students understand those paths and those journeys. But I also think part of it's on the admissions committees. Part of it's on the schools to say, I might take a 385 or a 375, God forbid, if the student took a little risk and got a B in a philosophy class because it wasn't necessarily in their sweet spot. So I think we have to work together. As part of why I was happy to be here tonight. We have to be able to articulate to students and help them follow their dreams and their passions. And I think part of it is from the medical community to say we value those capabilities and skills. I can also sell the food for the soul, but our students are pragmatic. And the food for the soul won't help them if they think it shuts off their dream of getting into medical school.
Sunita, tell me, when you're evaluating quality performance, what are the things that you look for in physicians that might reflect on the humanities? Is there anything that seems to stand out? Is there a way to measure humanity as you're looking at quality?
Today, there's not a metric, so to speak, that we would directly measure humanities for, but I can tell you that having a humanities background, being able to think critically, being able to have empathy, being able to have compassion for your patient is what's pulling into the patient's overall experience and healing process. And patient experience is a very heavily weighted quality measure within our healthcare systems today and has real dollars attached to it. And so I think that the liberal arts and the humanities and understanding that as a healthcare provider shouldn't be looked at as anything other than another lever to really push quality in healthcare. And it's not entirely seen like that at all today. It's a matter of pulling the threads out to understand that for every different type of patient coming through with different backgrounds, different cultures, you don't have that ability to think critically if you didn't take a philosophy class, or you don't know how to react when things are not going your way. It makes the patient experience quite hard. So,
Sunita, you shared with us before on the panel your story about how you became a doctor and how your liberal arts and music played a role. Would you mind sharing that with the audience?
Sure. So I started playing the violin when I was 3 years old, and actually was, when I was 16, the second youngest member of the SMU Conservatory Chamber Orchestra. The youngest one was 5. So it was me and her and a bunch of college kids. We toured throughout Europe, and it was a fantastic time. I ended up majoring in music, knowing that I would go to medical school because I've always loved the sciences, and I never separated the two in my head. I have a love and a passion for science in a way that I have a love and passion for the arts and for music. So I ended up going to the University of Miami, which at the time, and still is today, is the #1 jazz school in the country, along with actually North Texas here. And I majored in music, and when you're a music major, you're not just playing the violin, you're learning all of the various aspects of different music with different cultures, and sound engineering, and there's a lot of other key aspects to it, including music history. So I got a lot of exposure to all of that. I ended up graduating and went to medical school. So I basically double majored, and I will never forget a friend of mine who's now a jazz pianist professionally in LA. He was a classmate of mine in undergrad. He came up to me on graduation day. He's like, "Well, where are you going after this?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm going to med school." And he stopped and he said, "Oh, well, that's a good backup plan, I guess." So, just because it didn't occur to them that I wouldn't have just been playing music. So I went to medical school, and I have a very strong interest in sudden cardiac death. And so I was always centered towards becoming a cardiologist and a cardiac electrophysiologist. And the electrophysiology part of it is all the electrical parts of the heart. And when I went to medical school, I connected with a professor named Bob Meyerberg, who is a leading expert in sudden cardiac death. He learned that I was a musician. So we began doing a research project looking at cardiac rhythms that are deadly and attaching musical notes to them. And to make a long story short, got with some colleagues in Boston and basically started creating music based off of real human heart rates. So there's actually an album, and if you listen to the one where it's just normal heart rhythm, it has a distinctly similar resemblance to Brahms, Bach. It's very bizarre to me even today, think about it. If you listen to the songs against a diseased heart, it's a little wonky, but it's still good there. It's a little bit more modern. But so that translation all the way from when I was 3 years old, I was finding myself in that same space in medical school, and then ended up doing electrophysiology. I'm a rhythm specialist, right? I hear most things in rhythm. And the other thing with me is that I've got a little bit of neuro differentiation. I have severe and very strong music synesthesia and color synesthesia. So all my memories, and basically anytime I hear music, all I see is color. So I would be sitting in the EP lab, and I'm basically in an operating room, and I could hear the heartbeats while my head was down, and I could see colors going through, and the minute that I heard the patient not doing well, I could hear the heartbeat ahead of everyone else. It was before it was on the screen. And so I share all this just to say there's such an interesting relationship between whether it's music or it's painting or it's languages or it's philosophy or sociology and healthcare. These are things that I don't think many of us have really seen or taken the time to kind of delve into. So it's been fantastic for me in my life and continues to be.
What color are you seeing out there? Dirk, talk to me about your background a little bit. You've come a long way. You were an English major at Yale. Tell us about your background at Lebanon.
So my background really started in one of the premises that I have in my mind. You guys can hear me okay? Is that why do we end up where we end up? And it's obviously nature and nurture. And are we all here today? Are we all passionate about the arts because we think it's going to make better doctors, better lawyers, better human beings? Or are we just here because of a combination of our genetics and what we got exposed to growing up that fed that and made us appreciate it, and made us love it, and made us want to continue to be exposed to it and enjoy it? In my sort of exposure was my dad was a heart surgeon, my mom was an artist, and from a very early age I got exposure. I had no particular interest or inclination to enjoy art or write or do anything. But then I started to get interested in writing in boarding school, and then college. I got very much interested in writing, and I think it was more for what it did for me, not so much the idea of sharing it. It was what it did for me. And I will say that I would not get into medical school today, and I'm confident of that statement. Partly because I failed the first organic chemistry final that I took, and I got a C in organic chemistry my fall semester. And to be fair to my soul, there was a walk in New Haven from the main campus to the Science Hill that was about a mile long. And walking up to organic chemistry with all the other pre-meds, we were as earnest as 20-year-olds could be. sort of weighed on me. And I ended up taking a seminar that same semester in fiction writing. And it was offered at the residential college that I was in. And the seminar met once a week on Wednesday evenings for 5 hours. And it was taught by an editor for Esquire magazine at the time, who edited Raymond Carver and other writers named Gordon Lish. And it was the most captivating 5 hours I experienced. And the start of it was you submitted your pieces of writing, and Mr. Lish got them as we were all sitting around this oak panel room around the table. Jones, nice piece of work. Fredrickson, like that metaphor there. Frater, I'm paraphrasing, this is awful. But it was something that I found sustaining. I regrouped, and I think I got an A the next semester in organic, and got into medical school, partly, I think, because I wrote an essay and it was clear at the time that I wasn't viewed as just an MCAT score. I wasn't viewed as just a GPA. I was viewed as somebody that had the potential to become a doctor. In med school, it was the most fascinating 4 years. It was more interesting than anything I'd ever been exposed to. How the body was constructed and how it went wrong. And then you get in face-to-face with people. And that's where the humanity part of it comes in. And I think in my attempting to understand why poetry is particularly important to me, it's about connective tissue. And it may be that love of the Dallas Cowboys is just as strong a way of connecting with people as a love of Emily Dickinson. But then it's about healing. And it's about the ability to heal yourself through doing something that you're an iterative part of, whether it's writing a poem or composing music or just playing music or painting or just learning about painting. And then it's what comes after whatever you've done that other people share with you. And so there's music I listen to when I'm depressed. There's literature I read when I'm feeling the need to be stimulated. And all of that, I think, does come together to make the argument that humanities and the arts are not just something that are for people who are gifted by whatever their genetics and whatever their nurture was to make them really appreciate it. I do think it brings something to what you do if your job is to help others and care for others that really can't be found in just the science. The science was fascinating. It's still fascinating. It's remarkable. And it's making us all potentially healthier. There are people today, maybe even in this room, who wouldn't be here if it weren't for the science. But when you're in the room with somebody, you have to be able to have them have confidence. If you care, you know what you're talking about, and if you don't, you'll find the answers. And that kind of leads into where AI fits in the future, and that's something I think everyone's interested in, and I'll leave it at that.
Well, I've been prompted. I want to read a quote from Dr. John Lantos, a well-respected doctor from Kansas City. This is part of an address he gave at Oxford University within the last month. He had been a patient and had gone through evaluations by doctors with some help from AI. I was unsettled by my own experience as a patient. My doctors were excellent. They did everything according to the book. They followed the evidence. They offered me choices. With my problems, I could have been dead. Instead, I feel great. Still, the particular excellence of the doctors was in providing skilled, high-tech interventions. The machines cannot, yet, do that. When it came to understanding what was going on, the chatbots were better than the humans. If my experience is generalizable, it is clear what the future holds. Physicians will be the technicians of medicine, while AI will be both the brain and the heart. AI will gather the data, counsel the patient, emote with the patient, present options, get the preoperative consent signed, discuss prognosis. Doctors will insert the stents. To say the least, I was startled to read that. I have one anecdote before I ask the panel for a response, is that when I was much younger, I had the pleasure of hearing a doctor named Melvin Judkins lecture. Back when I learned how to do cardiac caths from the groin, you have to manipulate the catheter in the groin, and up in the region of the heart, you have to twist it and turn it, and it often took a great deal of time and expertise to pop that catheter into the coronary artery. And it would sometimes take an hour to get the catheter where you wanted it. Dr. Judkins came and lectured, and he was both a physician, but he was also an engineer, and he designed a Judkins catheter. And it has a particular bend on it, so you put it in from the groin, put it over a guiding wire, take a guide wire out and push. And if you push, about 95% of the time, it will pop into the coronary artery immediately. He said, I've designed this catheter where even a monkey could get it in. And many of them do. I think it's germane to what we're talking about. Does the quote that I just read bother you at all, Tom?
No. It doesn't really, because I think it misses something that's essential about lawyering and doctoring. And I want to build on something that Sunita said earlier. One of my volunteer gigs is working with first, second, third, and fourth year med students at UT Southwestern in small seminars where the focus is ethics. And I remember very distinctly the discussion leader was the number 2 guy in surgery, a very intense fellow, and very sort of hardwired to what he did. And I thought, sort of an odd choice to lead an ethics discussion, but I was being pre-judgmental, and I shouldn't have been. We had a case study that involved a patient who was going to need medication and follow-up care, but had a very dicey home situation, and her finances were terrible. It sort of raised the issue of whether she was going to be able to actually follow through with the plan that was being developed for her over the next few months to see whether she would respond. And one of the med students, fourth year med students, said, yeah, that's not medicine. And in some sense, I suppose she was right. It's going to be sent over to social work, and there'll be some folks in the hospital who will work really hard to make sure she has some home visitation, maybe gets qualified for Medicaid, does the things you do in order to meet her social, economic needs. But a doctor has to recognize that. The doctor has to make that referral and call for social work to get involved. And that's the humane and empathic aspect to practicing medicine. But I don't see the data points that are going to be fed to AI to generate that level of plan. And there's a lot more to empathy, there's a lot more to the interchange that occurs in a doctor's office between patient and physician. Just like in a law office, but that one example has stuck with me for 25 years. That there's that level of engagement and caring is going to be hard to duplicate in a machine. Maybe they'll get there. They've made huge strides, but I still think there's dimensions that require more than just data.
Jay, is AI becoming a topic of discussion? I'm sure it is at SMU. And one of the views we have is that we can focus on AI in 3 ways. It can become our friend, it can become our enemy, or we'll come to some sort of compromise. How do you deal with students and teaching them about this? I know there are questions about them using it inappropriately. That's not really what I'm talking about. How do we make it our friend?
Yeah, I think it's something we talk about probably multiple times a day. And one of those common questions I've gotten as president has probably been, what are we doing about it? How are we thinking about it? And what we're going to work hard on is to try to have a department by department conversation about the student's journey. And I would think about it as, I think if we polled the faculty, most would agree students need some basic understanding, ability to think about things from first principles, think deeply, communicate, all that sort of stuff. And that probably means it's going to start out being a little bit more technologically light. But we also realize in the back end, when they come out, then they need to have the tools to go out and to apply them to be competitive in whatever field or market they're going to enter. And so the hope is to have that conversation at the department level and candidly take it out of individual faculty members' hands. What I worry a lot about is if two faculty members teach the same class, one is sort of anti the technology, one is super pro, then the students get way different experiences from what was supposed to be the same class. And Tom can tell you about fighting with faculty, it's very hard. It's easier to say, have the faculty design that journey and think about what arc they want the students to take as they go forward. And then I think, when it goes well, you're going to have really talented people that have, in my language, more leverage. They're going to have more ability to make a bigger impact because things will scale differently. And so I think in the right moments, in the right hands, it's going to be a incredible tool. And so what we're going to, I think, focus more and more on is attracting well-rounded, smart students who can talk to humans, who can get things done, have a little bit of an entrepreneurial mindset, are curious about the world. Because I think some of the other technical things really are going to become more of a commodity. And that's partly why I'm so optimistic about where the future for SMU. I think if you gave me a choice, I would go, in my language, sort of long the SMU thesis, and I think some of the really deep technical, nerdy schools are going to struggle more because they're going to have more of an adjustment to make, where I think places that are used to that kind of more liberal arts mindset are going to have an easier time adapting.
Sunita, is there any application work that you're doing for AI, good, bad, or indifferent?
It's interesting within the healthcare space because y'all hear me now? In the healthcare space, this is one of these trains that have left the building and we're trying to stay on it. And it can be difficult at times because when it goes that fast, in order for us to slow down and figure out, A, how to utilize it, and B, the balance of using AI against our own humanity it becomes very tough in the tussle of the day. I think that just from my experience being over the medical group and watching how things are evolving, there is a clear benefit to AI if you can decrease administrative burden, which then would decrease burnout of physicians. But you could over AI too, right? And create more burden. The EMR has done that to a great extent. I mean, everyone thought it was going to be a lot more efficient. I can tell you I wish I was back to paper. It was so much easier for me. I could just write it and we're done and we moved on. Now we've got to click 100 clicks to get through just the orders. And so we have to be careful getting too far into technology. The second thing I would say about AI, and I do have, Tom actually triggered my memory of a couple of stories. Number one is we had a recent patient in one of our clinics who walked in and the front desk receptionist just kind of knew that she didn't look so well. And I think the liberal arts in particular, understanding some of the complexities also helps you pick up certain physical language, or I don't know, or oral language, cultural language of patients and people in general. Anyways, this patient was having a stroke, and she called the clinicians, they called 911, patient was saved, did everything. And when I heard the story, I told the team, I said, this is what AI is never going to do. Had we relied on AI, it wouldn't have picked up any of that. My second story, though, is that we do use a ambient listening tool within the clinic that will listen while you're talking to the patient, and it'll start dictating a note. and it's brilliant actually because the physician can actually look at the patient. The patient's like, oh my God, my physician's looking at me. They're not looking at a computer. You can actually have that meaningful conversation and the note is finished. There was one particular patient who really loved Star Wars. And the AI dictation picked up on that. The patient came in a couple of times, so AI learned, oh, this person likes Star Wars. And the patient sent a note, and AI had an automatic reply, and the physician, of course, has to send it. And at the very end of the note, you should do this. It said, and may the force be with you. So, at some level, I do think that if we're not careful, not pulling the liberal arts and the ability to have those type of interactions with patients, really, because that's a very human reaction for a computer to have. You run the risk of allowing this technology to run so far ahead of us with something that's really been manufactured, right? So it's an interesting topic. And
To that point, about 80 or 90% of doctors are now using AI in their office. You have to get permission, but the AI will do a note from the office visit. The doctor is supposed to carefully read it and sign off on it. And 30% of doctors' time currently is being spent doing notes. And the question comes up, if you get 30% of your time back, what are you going to do with it? Is that the time that you're going to use to be humane with that patient, to have the discussion, to go further in their complaint than just handing them a prescription? Or are you going to see 30% more patients? I think these are the issues that are before us. Any thoughts or comments?
I do think that, I've got the ambient AI listening. It wasn't very good a year ago. It's gotten really good in the interval. The other use of AI that's made a huge difference is a service called Open Evidence AI. And it was started, the collaboration with the Journal of the American Medical Association, New England Journal of Medicine. You have to have a medical license to use it. And the universe that it's bound by, that it mines, is only the universe of these established journals, credible, vetted, published articles. So it's basically the information that I want, that I need. And in the past, if I had a problem that I just didn't have enough experience, or it wasn't in the top of my head of what to do, it would be hours, sometimes days, of tracking down articles that were pertinent, reading them, making sure the process of acquiring that information was actually justified and reliable. And now I can ask Open Evidence AI a difficult, specific question, and in 2 minutes, sometimes less, and it categorizes it, provides the reference I can look up, and that's astonishing. And that's made a huge difference. And for primary care in this country, rural areas, a lot of it won't be done by MDs. It probably will raise the bar for everyone getting taken care of. I think the real danger of AI, in my mind, is that it'll take away the process of learning how to think, learning how to evaluate problems, how to reason and come to your own conclusions. And if we as physicians, lawyers, professionals of any kind are dependent on AI to provide the answers rather than provide the established bedrock of knowledge that we've always relied on, whether it started with a textbook from our medical school years, that's one of the risks of AI. But I don't think AI, there's sort of a gradient of progress that AI could go through that will then incorporate robotics and humanoids and if you take chess, when Big Blue, IBM's Big Blue beat Garry Kasparov, that was the end, because chess is all about probability. And there may be different styles of players and the two players fly, but if it's just about probability and unlimited computing power, Magnus Carlsen doesn't play a computer. He knows, there's no point. So it's still, we can still have fun. For interactions with medical knowledge, there was a study done that showed that taking the medical exams, AI would get 90% of the right standardized questions. Medical students, not quite through their training, would get 50% of it right. But what they got right was predictable. What they didn't get right was what was unpredictable. And if there was a second diagnosis or a third diagnosis possible, they wouldn't get it right. And the ability to understand not just the knowledge base, but the nuance of how to interpret our fellow human beings is a huge part that will take AI, and maybe it's just a generation, but it seems like it may be beyond AI. You know, in my example, when I worked in the emergency room, you know, you get a bright young medical student or intern, goes in to see the patient first as part of their training, and I know from the list of what the patient's in for, it's chest pain. And intern comes out, 5 minutes later, what's going on with Mr. Jones? Oh, he's doing okay, he's not having chest pain. Like, really? Well, go into the room, and there's, a CEO looking appropriately uncomfortable for being out of control in a situation, in a bed, and his wife. And, I asked, Mr. Jones, are you having any chest pain? Nope. His wife's like, are you having any indigestion? Yeah, no, I've been having this heavy pressure in my chest that's been going on and off, especially when I go upstairs. I'm like, okay, I'm calling Dr. Harper. And that kind of nuance of how people process their own information, how they are able to express themselves, what they're afraid of that they're not telling you they're afraid of, is something that will be the last thing that AI, if ever, is able to capture and do well. But AI can still make it better at least for doctors.
If I could just chime in, the last class I taught at SMU before I retired, which was 25 days ago, by the way, was a civil procedure class. And I hadn't taught civil procedure in 30 years, but I was called in on kind of an emergency basis to pick up the course. And my final exam included a question that focused on one of the hairiest, scariest aspects of civil procedure. I won't bore you with the details, but it was based on a Supreme Court case that was pending before the Supreme Court. It had been argued, but not decided. And I mentioned the case in class, just to sort of give the students a leg up in case they wanted to do a little extra work, read the case, and maybe it would be on the exam. Well, it was on the exam. And it was a medical malpractice case, actually, which very rarely gets to the Supreme Court of the United States. Anyway, I took my question and ran it through, I think it was Claude, it might have been Gemini, but one of the two of my favorite platforms for AI. And the answer I got back analyzed every case we had discussed in that chapter, applied all of those holdings to the fact pattern with some subtlety, and then compared my question to the Supreme Court case that was pending, that hadn't been decided, and drew the parallels and the distinctions between my fact pattern and the Supreme Court case. It was an A-plus answer. Compared to anything a first-year law student would write, but I think compared to anything a second or third-year law student would write, it was an A-plus answer. It was correct, it was subtle, it was discerning, and scary as hell. Because that's a level of performance that we're talking about getting toward in medicine. What's next? Accounting? Actuaries? They're probably already there in spades, right? So it is, I want to believe it's a tool. I want to believe it's a tool that if it's used correctly, enhances through efficiency and through a breadth of data points that are available to AI that would take me a long time to find. But if we're not careful with the results, if we're not discerning ourselves about the distinctions so that we can test what we know against what we're being told by AI, then you're going to have, as we do now, lawyers who are being sanctioned for filing briefs with made-up cases and made-up quotations. And even a federal judge who had to withdraw her opinion when it was pointed out that she was citing the cases and quoting from opinions that were made up. It was an AI-written judicial opinion. Wow. So I hope some of those cautionary tales will help inform us and our successors, folks we train in practice or in school, to the appropriate use of this incredibly powerful but also incredibly dangerous, potentially dangerous tool.
Tom, when we had lunch, you discussed the concept of a lawyer or a doctor dealing with a scared patient, somebody who would have a lawsuit that was not going well, and how the training of humanities may help you deal with them. Remember that when we talked about that? Can you expand on that a little bit?
I remember lunch was really good, but it's just, it's one of those things that law schools don't do a very good job teaching, and I suspect medical schools don't do a real good job teaching either. There's a human and humane response to a situation that draws on everything you've learned in life. And AI is not going to be a substitute for that. The words that comfort, the plans that try to remediate and move forward in a constructive way, those are things that I think human beings bring to other human beings.
Dirk, how does it do with poetry?
Well, so the one thing I really love about AI is I can be really insulting to Claude without feeling in any way guilty about it. And I've been using Claude to analyze poems that I've written based on the established sort of criteria that are all coming from the literature of literary criticism. So they start with a good area. And then, Claude will come up sometimes with interesting associations that I hadn't made myself even. Maybe I'd intuited them. But what I had maybe been trying to do in a poem, I'd have to point out. And Claude would say, oh yes, good point. I'm so glad you brought that up. And it would say, I kept coming back to that phrase again and again. I'm like, what? You kept coming back to that phrase and say, oh, you're right. I don't have memory and I don't have... And it's an interesting stimulus to me when I have a poem that I've got, and I just have to keep building in the rubrics. No, I don't want you to, my scores kept getting higher and higher for a poem. And I said, why is this poem, scoring a 97 when, Edna St. Vincent's Malay's wonderful sonnet, scored a 96? And be like, well, good point. And maybe I'm just wanting to encourage you. I'm like, I don't need encouragement. I need analysis. But the exercise is I'm going to read a poem, and I asked, might have been Chat instead of Claude, to write a poem that fed in all of the different aspects of the poem that I could identify. And I was going to be sort of unfair to AI and read my poem, which I like, but then read the AI poem or vice versa. But that wasn't even fair, because I realized, it took me about 20 revisions to get my poem to where I enjoyed reading it, whereas I'd only given Chat one chance at it. But the serious reality is AI can never write a poem that has any significance, because AI hasn't got a life. And AI might be able to imitate poems based on an established poet's style, and they could even be pleasing to read and even be encouraging. And once you've written a poem, it's not really yours anymore. And so, does it matter if there was no experience that informed an AI-created poem or an AI-created song? I'm not sure I have the answer to that. But I enjoy reading poetry by people who lived and died and experienced their lives and expressed their lives through their art and music, poetry, literature. But I don't think AI can replace what happens by being alive. I think it can replace knowledge that is acquired by some very, very smart people, and it's got the computing power that, we can't even remotely compete with from that perspective. But it can't compete with being in the same room with another human being and sharing whatever it is you're sharing, whether it's your knowledge and your caring or art. And so that's encouraging. I'm not worried about AI taking away what I love humanities. I am worried about AI somehow getting finger on the nuclear red button, and that bothers me. But I'm not worried about AI taking away what we love about literature and art and music.
Before we leave, I'm going to have Dirk read a poem in a few minutes. We had a speaker, Mike Lacombe, who the editor for the Annals of Internal Medicine ad libitum article, and we were at dinner and we were talking about poetry, and he said, "Any of you write poetry?" And Dirk said, "Well, I dabble in it." And so Mike encouraged him to write poetry. And how many of you have published now? 20. Well, there's a story there. He's a good author. He's a good poet. But we had somebody that encouraged him to take a talent and advance it. And I did start out rather negatively in my comments tonight. On purpose, I told them I was going to do that. But I'm an eternal optimist. And I think in the remaining minutes, I'd like to hear how we think we can take what we've talked about tonight and change some of the negatives that I mentioned and turn them into positives. How do we as educators and doctors and lawyers and poets, CEOs, people in business, people at home taking care of children, how do we make sure that the humanities, the liberal arts, the things that make us different as human beings don't fall away, don't disappear? It's a real commitment. And I'd be interested even in some basic ideas from the panel about where we go from here. I love the fact that SMU is coming up with a new plan. I'm constantly thinking about how they can take these bright students and make them better. But deep in my heart, I believe the humanities, the liberal arts, is what separates us from other animals. It is what separates us from people that don't care. It is what separates the excellent from the ordinary. And I don't want to see that go away in my lifetime or the lifetimes of my children or grandchildren. And I am of a mind that if we don't do anything, AI is going to be very powerful. So I'm very interested. Are there some takeaways? And we may not have them tonight, but we plan to have follow-up meetings on these topics. And I'd love to hear if there are thoughts about where we go from here. How can we change the trajectory of the loss of this? Jay, you're reaching for your mic. That's great.
I was going to turn it on for you. No, I think, part of why this is helpful for me is I think it's inspiring, and then it calls into question how can we get stories like the ones we've heard tonight in front of our students. And I also think, back to your point, Dirk, that story's going to be different coming from a human than a machine. And if it's a lived experience, I think it's going to resonate in a way that you can't replicate otherwise. But I think if we think about ways to get people like the ones here tonight to come back to campus and talk to our young students and talk about their stories and hear the reasons why there is a case for liberal arts, even in the most technical of fields, I think it'll connect. I know our dean of the Methodist School of the Arts is here, Dean Holland, but this is the kind of thing I think we get fired up about, is how do we get people to come share their experiences with our students. It means something differently than it does from the faculty member. If somebody comes back and says, I've been at the edge of my field, but here's why that class I took in sociology mattered.
Just one of those thoughts that cross your mind. In the pre-meds, they have to do shadowing for 75 hours to get into medical school. Personally, I question the value of 75 hours of shadowing. It's the statement the medical schools make is it proves that they really want to be a doctor. Well, does it? And doesn't it matter on who they shadow? I would rather have that time be spent for pre-meds to be meeting with people who care about the humanities, teaching them literature, teaching them music, teaching them history. And another example, you love business, and I love business too. We're known as physicians to be not the best businessmen. Now that may be unfair, but wouldn't it be something that pre-meds had to take at least a simple business course? They're dealing with up to $300,000 worth of debt. They've got to dig their way out from that. 8.94% interest is where they get those loans. It doesn't take a math genius or a business genius to know that they're not going to do that very quickly. I think an idea of taking people in the community that love and care about it, those of you in this audience, to go and speak with these young people may be the way around it, and to get the medical schools, the universities, and colleges together to talk about these issues, because I think they're very important. Sunita, were you?
I think, to me personally, this has become almost a cry for help in the healthcare field, because as Dr. Harper said in the beginning, suicide rate has skyrocketed for physicians. The burnout rate is extremely high. So we have these kids who are trying to get into medical school and they're on a race, and it's like, why are we going this fast when you've got this whole life in front of you? I see them in their 30s and 40s and 50s at the prime of their careers, and they don't have another avenue. Some of them, if they didn't have a liberal arts additional piece of their brain to lean on, something. You go to, our reimbursement has gone down, cost has gone up, and at the end of the day, you have physicians who are so burned out, and they feel very stuck at times. It would be wonderful for them to lean on poetry, or pick up the guitar, or paint, or take a philosophy class, something. But the number of physicians we have today that don't understand that that's even an option is extremely high. And I think what scares me the most about AI is that AI is really built to reflect back what you're telling it, right? So if you say, I like this poem, what do you think? It's going to tell you, oh, I like that poem too. Because all it sees is what you fed it. It's not seeing the complex analysis of that poem. It wasn't taught that yet, right? So when you then have people who are down in the dumps, and they're looking for something to make them feel better, and they're going towards AI rather than, even just going outside and kind of thinking through poetry of Robert Frost or whatever it is, if you don't have that as a baseline, I agree with you, John. I don't think that the shadowing is doing a whole lot. I think that the protection of their mental health when they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s is so much more value added than having a shadow already burned out physician at the time.
Well, before we end here, I put Dirk on the spot. We were together the other night, and he was talking about his poem, and he had also asked AI to write a similar poem. And he read the AI poem, and I have to admit we kind of smirked. But then he read his poem. And I'd like him to read it before we're dismissed, and I have a couple of comments at the end. But I'd like you to listen carefully to someone who wasn't writing poetry a decade ago, who is now published, and wrote this. Dirk?
Can you hear me okay with the lapel? So this is a poem I wrote after visiting my dad, who was a heart surgeon, had dementia that was getting progressively worse. And as most of my poems have been a means of processing sadness or processing something traumatic. When I was in the ER, I'd get home at 12 and I would be able to go to sleep for hours. And the idea of trying to make something either whole out of something that's broken, or something beautiful out of something ugly, or something at least bittersweet out of something sad is usually what the impulse is behind me writing a poem. This poem was published in the Annals of Internal Medicine's ad libitum section in February of 2024, and it's titled At the End of a Winter's Day. My father smiles and says my name when I come to visit. No longer complains when I turn off the talking heads.
I retell stories he told me once and hope they might unfurl his withered memories as water poured on dry soil might find its way into parched taproots. He could once launch a story at a name's mere mention, just one word releasing like magic the spill of captured moments long past. I watch him now slopping soup into his mouth, staining his bib before he grows silent under my gaze. He holds his spoon down its handle like a child. The sight puts me back over his shoulder in the OR, staring into an opened chest, parted skin stained iodine brown at the cavity's edge, as one gloved hand lifted gently the opened heart, the other held unwavering the scimitar-shaped needle glinting at the end of its metal holder before he pierced the muscle in seamless arcs until the woven heart was shut. He has grown quiet now, like the emptied core of a winter forest, a winter worse for its absent promise of spring, as I too struggle to find things to say. He nods when he asks if maybe it's time for a nap. Windows lining the long hall are brittle with cold, frost stenciling the glass as the pins of wind-whipped oak leaves skate across their panes. And I hover by his side, entangled by memories, as he fiercely grips the handles of his walker, inching forward toward his rest. I stay to help him get on the bed and watch him curled on his side, knees tucked, clunky shoes one atop the other. His head rests on his arm, elbow bent, his hands suspended above him, like atoms waiting for God's touch. And I fear he will be preserved this way in my mind, quiet, frozen permanence, swabbing all that was vital in him. I say my goodbye as he sleeps. And while asking his caretaker to call, I can't find my keys. And stuck, trying to retrace my steps, start to fear that it has begun. Yet find instead somehow a child's memory, seeking him, eyes opening a count too soon, running like a hound through warm fields, searching for pebbles laid like arrows, tufts of grass tied at angles, veering one way then another, before a soft whistle sounds from above, and I see him grinning from his hide in the crabapple tree. And for the first time that long day, I smile without effort, knowing even that I'm not yet prepared to write his obituary.
Thank you, Dirk. I think you can tell we're passionate about this. We may have struggles ahead to maintain the liberal arts where they belong. But a very good friend of mine gave me a quote that I ever thought was very pertinent from Václav Havel from Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic that I think fits the way I feel about this, and I hope the way you feel about it. So anyone who claims that I'm a dreamer who expects to transform hell into heaven is wrong. I have few illusions, but I feel a responsibility to work towards the things I consider good and right. I don't know whether I'll be able to change certain things for the better or not at all. Both outcomes are possible. There's only one thing I will not concede, that it might be meaningless to strive in a good cause. I ask you to join me in that cause. I ask you to go forward to see if we can't make a difference. I'm going to dismiss you with a benediction that I give to my residents that I think in many words puts what we should be thinking about as a doctor. Now go into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to that which is good. Honor all men and women. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. and may the grace of God be with you always. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause for We will be in touch when we have more meetings in the future. We've had writing contests in the past we hope we can bring back. We'll have some other breakout meetings. Thank you for the support of our efforts. Good evening.